Tonight, we journey into the shadows, unraveling stories of terrifying encounters with entities from realms beyond. If you think you're brave enough, join us as we delve into accounts that defy logic and chill the soul. But beware! Each tale serves as a haunting reminder that some doors should remain closed. Title: The Midnight Shadow, A Tale of the Axeman. August 1918, New Orleans Uneasy Peace. The story begins with a description of New Orleans in the late summer of 1918. The city's usual vibrancy is somewhat subdued, and there's an undercurrent of unease. Italian immigrants form a tight community, sharing a bond forged from mutual struggle and cultural preservation. We're introduced to Joseph Maggio, a hardworking Italian grocer, and his wife, Catherine. They're well-liked but keep mostly to themselves, running their small grocery store that caters to other immigrant families. This setting also introduces Detective Thomas Garrett, a seasoned officer with a no-nonsense approach, and his new partner, Ada Sullivan, who's younger but sharp and observant. Their partnership begins on uneasy terms, with Garrett initially doubtful of Ada's capabilities but gradually realizing her dedication to the job. A few chapters delve into the lives of New Orleans' Italian-American community. Strange, unsettling rumors circulate. Talk of a shadowy figure seen lingering around homes late at night. Dark whispers of mysterious footsteps heard in the quiet hours before dawn. People shrug it off as gossip, but the stories get darker. Strange symbols are found scratched onto doors, and residents feel as if someone is watching them. Detectives Garrett and Sullivan receive word of a break-in at a local Italian bakery. Nothing is stolen, but items are moved or left in disturbing arrangements. When they arrive at the scene, Garrett is quick to dismiss it as petty vandalism, but Ada finds scratches on the door frame that suggest a larger, more deliberate pattern. Late one night, tragedy strikes. Joseph and Catherine Maggio are brutally attacked in their own home. The story details the silent approach of the killer, painting a bone-chilling image of his silent, methodical movements as he enters the couple's bedroom. Joseph and Catherine are murdered in their sleep, their throats slit with a razor before the attacker strikes them with an axe, ensuring there's no chance of survival. The next morning, a neighbor discovers the horrific scene. Garrett and Ada arrive to a house soaked in blood, with signs of a struggle etched into the walls. A sense of dread fills the air. Garrett tries to remain stoic, but Ada's horror is palpable. She's shaken, questioning how such violence could happen to people who were beloved members of the community. The Maggios' home is in disarray, but their valuables remain untouched, ruling out theft as a motive. Over the following days, Garrett and Sullivan conduct interviews with neighbors and other Italian families, but everyone is gripped by fear, reluctant to speak out. The detectives start piecing together the little they have. A man, possibly tall, has been seen lingering near Italian homes at odd hours. But there's no clear description, no name, just rumors and vague recollections. As days pass, the community grows more fearful. Stores close earlier, families take turns staying up to guard their homes, and a collective anxiety begins to take hold of the city. Many are certain the Maggios were killed because of their heritage, and the once welcoming streets of New Orleans feel hostile, even to those who have lived there for decades. Soon after, another attack occurs, though this time the victim survives. The man recalls being woken by a creak in the floorboards and a shadow looming over him before he was struck. He can barely describe his attacker, and his account is confused from fear and injury. But the man insists that his attacker had a frenzied energy and eyes like fire. The newspapers catch wind of the story, dubbing the assailant the Axeman. They paint him as a figure of terror, feeding the city's growing fear. Garrett and Sullivan, feeling the pressure from the media and public, push their investigation further. Garrett becomes obsessed with tracking the Axeman, often staying at the precinct well past midnight, poring over files and chasing any lead, no matter how small. While digging through the sparse evidence, Ada finds a note left at the Maggio crime scene, though it's partially illegible. The scrawled message hints at a date and time, but it's unclear. Ada and Garrett interpret it as a vague threat, a promise that the killer will return, taunting them with his ability to slip through their grasp. As the detectives debate the meaning of the note, the Axeman strikes again. This time, it's a young couple who are lucky enough to survive, though both are left with lasting injuries. Garrett and Ada push for answers, feeling the case slip further away from them with each attack. Ada proposes bringing in a handwriting analyst, while Garrett insists they focus on finding witnesses. In the final chapters of Part 1, the city of New Orleans is locked in a state of panic. Rumors grow wilder, and people are terrified to leave their homes after dark. The once thriving Italian neighborhood is nearly deserted at night, and business owners carry weapons, even hiring guards. Jazz clubs in the city begin closing early, and the streets seem to pulse with a quiet dread. Garrett and Sullivan face mounting pressure as the city's fear turns to anger. The Italian community, feeling targeted and ignored by law enforcement, holds rallies, demanding action. Garrett, himself frustrated, admits to Ada that he's never felt so powerless in an investigation. March 1919, New Orleans at boiling point. Part 2 opens with the city on edge as the new year brings no relief from the terror of the Axeman. People are beginning to lose hope that he will ever be caught, and the streets feel heavier with suspicion and fear. Small gatherings spring up to discuss the attacks, and rumors about his identity grow more elaborate and frantic. Some believe he's a spirit or a curse upon the Italian community, while others suspect he's hiding in plain sight. Detectives Thomas Garrett and Ada Sullivan continue to lead the case, their faces now familiar in the papers and newsrooms of New Orleans. Garrett's determination to catch the Axeman has become an obsession, while Ada feels the weight of each new attack personally, her empathy for the victims driving her to find the answers no one else has. Their partnership has strengthened, but the tension and frustration from the lack of progress are starting to wear on both of them. A few chapters focus on a shocking event that brings new terror to the city. A letter, purportedly from the Axeman himself, arrives at the offices of the Times-Picayune newspaper. It promises that the Axeman will strike again on a specific date, in just a few days. In the note, he writes in a taunting, eerie tone, challenging the police to catch him and stating that he will spare any house that plays jazz music on the night of his promised attack. The news of the letter spreads like wildfire. People argue over its authenticity, with some doubting it's truly from the killer, while others are convinced it's a final warning. Jazz bands are booked to play in homes and dance halls across the city, with families crowding together, hoping to keep the Axeman away. Garrett and Ada try to trace the letter, working with handwriting analysts and questioning the employees at the newspaper office. They even track down paper vendors and ink suppliers, hoping to find some thread that will lead them to the killer. But the leads are thin, and the detectives face mounting frustration as they realize the letter may be a carefully planted misdirection. Meanwhile, the detectives begin to work longer hours, unable to ignore the growing body count and the public pressure. Garrett has begun to experience restless nights and paranoia, feeling as though the Axeman is always just a step ahead. Ada, though disturbed by the case's details, remains focused, encouraging Garrett and trying to keep him steady as the stress mounts. In a breakthrough, they learn of a new witness, a young woman who claims to have seen a shadowy figure lurking around the house of one of the victims shortly before the attack. When questioned, she describes a tall man with a frantic, jerky gait and something unsettling about his face, though she cannot remember specifics due to her shock. On the night the Axeman promised to strike, New Orleans is alive with the sound of jazz. Families cram into homes, strangers gather together, and music fills every corner of the city. Garrett and Ada join a patrol team, staying vigilant as they scour the city streets and visit the neighborhood hotspots. The city holds its collective breath, listening for any sound that might signal the Axeman's arrival. People sit on edge, some staring out their windows into the night, looking for the dark figure that has haunted their dreams. As the night wears on, tension fills every quiet moment between songs, and many cannot sleep, jumping at every distant noise. But when dawn arrives, no attacks have been reported. New Orleans breathes a sigh of relief, tentatively hopeful that the music may have kept the Axeman at bay. The peace is short-lived. Days later, a gruesome discovery shocks the city once again. Another Italian family has been found murdered in their home. The attack is brutal, matching the Axeman's usual pattern, and eerily similar in its ferocity and violence. The details of this attack spread quickly, and people grow suspicious of everyone around them. Some accuse their neighbors, others blame outsiders, and whispers of conspiracy ripple through the city. People who felt safe days ago now fear the killer is unstoppable. Garrett and Ada realize the pattern. The Axeman thrives on the fear he creates, playing with the city's nerves as he continues to evade capture. Garrett and Ada analyze every clue they have, desperate for any hint that might lead to a breakthrough. They revisit the crime scenes, trying to uncover patterns they might have missed in their initial investigations. Ada notices that each attack appears slightly more brutal than the last, suggesting that the killer may be growing more confident or more desperate. While sifting through their notes, Ada pieces together small details others have overlooked. The subtle shifts in the killer's methods, his choice of targets, and even the specific locations. She believes the Axeman may be watching his victims before the attacks, learning their routines and waiting for the perfect moment. As Ada shares her findings with Garrett, a sense of determination takes hold of them both. They decide to go undercover, immersing themselves in the city's Italian neighborhoods to see if they can find any trace of the killer lurking in the shadows. Garrett even arranges to stay in a small apartment within the neighborhood, hoping to draw the Axeman out by blending into the community. As Garrett patrols one evening, he notices a figure standing in an alley, half hidden by shadows. When Garrett approaches, the figure disappears, but not before dropping a small item. A pocket watch, its face cracked and worn. Garrett picks it up, turning it over in his hands as he considers what it might mean. The pocket watch becomes a critical piece of evidence, something that Garrett and Ada believe could be linked to the Axeman, though they have no solid proof. They trace the watch back to a pawn shop, learning that it was sold by a man fitting the vague description given by witnesses. But the trail ends there, and they are once again left with more questions than answers. The detectives come across a critical clue. A former associate of one of the Axeman's previous victims claims to have seen a man lurking around the victim's store days before the attack. This witness describes a tall, lean figure with an intense, unsettling stare. Though the description is vague, it aligns with the fragmented profile the detectives have pieced together. Garrett and Ada manage to track down several men who match the description, all of whom are Italian laborers or tradesmen working late-night shifts. They begin shadowing these individuals, watching them for any sign that might tie them to the murders. This time-consuming task takes them deeper into New Orleans' working-class districts, where they confront the city's darker undercurrents. While on a stakeout, Garrett catches sight of a suspicious man outside a local grocery store late one night. The man matches the Axeman's description, and Garrett follows him through dark alleyways, careful to remain unnoticed. The scene is tense and filled with the gritty, eerie atmosphere of New Orleans at night. At one point, the man pauses, as if sensing Garrett's presence. In a heartbeat, he disappears into the shadows, leaving Garrett momentarily confused and vulnerable. The encounter leaves him shaken but more convinced than ever that they're close to the Axeman's identity. Desperate to draw out the Axeman, the detectives devise a risky plan. Ada volunteers to put herself in harm's way by frequenting the areas the Axeman is known to target, hoping to provoke him into revealing himself. Although Garrett is initially opposed to the idea, Ada insists, pointing out that it might be their only chance to capture the killer. The next few nights are tense as Ada walks alone through the dimly lit streets, constantly aware of every shadow and every sound. Garrett, watching her from a distance, feels an unbearable tension, fearing for her safety. These scenes are filled with suspense, capturing both Ada's bravery and Garrett's mounting dread as they inch closer to the final confrontation. After days of tense anticipation, their plan works. Late one night, as Ada walks through a deserted area, she catches a figure out of the corner of her eye. The man is tall and moves with a frantic energy, similar to previous witness descriptions. Ada stays calm, her pulse racing, as the figure begins to follow her, his footsteps echoing ominously in the empty street. Garrett, waiting nearby, observes the scene with growing anxiety. He signals backup but knows they must wait until the right moment to ensure they catch the Axeman in the act. As Ada leads the Axeman down a narrow, secluded alley, she turns to face him, determined to confront the man who has terrorized the city. For the first time, she sees his face, gaunt, intense, and twisted with a look of unhinged violence. Garrett and the backup officers rush in as the axeman lunges at Ada, wielding an axe. What follows is a violent struggle, with the axeman fighting fiercely, his strength fueled by desperation. The officers manage to subdue him, but not before both Garrett and Ada sustain injuries in the chaos. The axeman is finally restrained, his face a mix of anger and exhaustion. His capture marks the end of a brutal chapter for New Orleans, yet the memory of his terror lingers in the minds of the detectives and the citizens he tormented. The man they capture is identified as a reclusive laborer with a troubled past, whose resentment toward the Italian community seems to have motivated his actions. In the days following his arrest, Garrett and Ada sift through evidence, linking him to multiple crime scenes and substantiating their suspicions about his mental instability. The trial becomes a public spectacle, with citizens crowding the courthouse, eager to see justice served. The axeman shows no remorse, instead sneering at the crowd and the detectives, as if daring them to understand his twisted motives. With the axeman's capture, the city slowly returns to normalcy, though the scars of his crimes remain. Garrett and Ada are celebrated as heroes, but they find little satisfaction in the victory, haunted by the faces of the victims they couldn't save. As they part ways after the case, Garrett reflects on the toll the investigation took on him, while Ada contemplates her future, realizing her work as a detective will always be shadowed by the memory of the axeman.